Welcome to When Africa Speaks, where legends come alive and greatness calls to greatness. In every corner of this vast continent, from the golden sands of the Sahara to the rolling hills of the south, from the ancient kingdoms of the west to the mighty mountains of the east, extraordinary souls have walked this earth. Men and women who dared to dream beyond their circumstances, who chose courage over comfort, who built bridges where others saw only rivers. This is our legendary corner, where the echoes of heroes past whisper secrets to the champions of tomorrow. Here, every story carries a spark, every tale holds a mirror, and every legend asks the same powerful question: what greatness lies sleeping within you? The world is waiting for the next legend. That legend could be you. That legend could be anyone brave enough to believe that ordinary people can do extraordinary things. Join our growing family of dreamers and achievers. Hit that subscribe button and let these timeless stories awaken the giant that lives inside your heart. Because when you discover the hero in someone else's story, you begin to write your own. Long ago, in the heart of West Africa, where the mighty Niger and Benue rivers danced together like old friends, there was a land called Nigeria. A land blessed by the gods with vibrant forests that stretched like green carpets, endless plains that kissed the horizon, golden hills that caught the morning sun, and mighty rivers that sang ancient songs. This blessed land was home to countless peoples, each as different as the colors of a rainbow, yet as connected as the roots of a great tree. In the north lived the proud Hausa people, whose warriors rode like thunder across the savannah, and whose scholars held the wisdom of centuries in their hearts. Their cities of Kano and Katsina buzzed with trade, learning, and the sound of craftsmen shaping gold and leather. In the west dwelt the mighty Yoruba, master builders and traders who created kingdoms that touched the clouds. Their capital, Ife, was said to be where the gods first walked on earth. They carved bronze so beautiful that angels wept to see it, and they built cities so grand that travelers came from across the world just to marvel at their beauty. In the east lived the clever and resourceful Igbo people, with hearts full of ambition and hands that could turn dust into gold. They were the merchants, the inventors, the dreamers who believed that with hard work and wisdom, any mountain could be moved. Their markets were legendary, their palm wine was sweet, and their proverbs could solve any problem. And across this vast land, like stars scattered across the night sky, lived the Kanuri, the Tiv, the Edo, the Fulani, the Ijaw, and many other tribes. Each had their own songs that could make the birds dance, their own dances that could make the earth smile, and their own stories that could make the ancestors proud. Together, they formed a magnificent tapestry of voices, languages, and traditions. But for many long years, this beautiful land was bound by chains that came from across the great ocean. The British had come like a storm from the sea, their great ships cutting through the Atlantic waters like metal whales. They brought with them soldiers with guns that roared like thunder, laws written in books the people could not read, and the heavy weight of an empire that stretched across the world. At first, they said they came to trade. They exchanged their manufactured goods for palm oil, groundnuts, cocoa, and other treasures of the land. But slowly, like a python that squeezes tighter with each breath, they began to take more control. They built railways that cut across the land like iron rivers, connecting cities and carrying away the wealth of Nigeria to distant shores. They constructed roads and administrative offices, imposing their own system of government on people who had governed themselves for thousands of years. The British collected taxes from markets that had always been free. They claimed forests that had belonged to entire communities for generations. They forced towns and villages to obey laws made by men who had never set foot on African soil, men who lived thousands of miles away across the ocean. Local kings and chiefs found their power reduced to mere ceremonies. Traditional councils that had settled disputes for centuries were replaced by colonial courts. Children were taught to speak English before their own languages, to learn the history of Britain while their own great ancestors were forgotten. But the people of Nigeria were not sheep to be led blindly. Deep in their hearts, a fire began to burn. In the villages, around cooking fires where grandmothers told stories to wide-eyed children, whispers of freedom traveled like seeds on the wind. "This is not right," the elders would say quietly. looking around to make sure no colonial officers were listening. Our fathers were not slaves. Our children should not be slaves either. In the cities, educated young men and women who had been to missionary schools began to ask dangerous questions. Why should we not rule ourselves? They wondered. Why should our wealth build palaces in London while our people remain poor? The fire of freedom began to spread from person to person, from village to village, from tribe to tribe. And soon, extraordinary leaders would emerge to fan this fire into a mighty flame that would light up the entire continent. In the bustling port city of Lagos, where the Atlantic Ocean kissed the shores of Nigeria, a man named Herbert Macaulay stood before growing crowds with eyes that blazed like stars and a voice that could wake the dead. Herbert was a grandson of Bishop Samuel Ajayi Crowther, the first African Anglican bishop. But unlike his grandfather, who worked within the system of the colonizers, Herbert chose to fight against it. He was an engineer, a musician, a journalist, and most importantly, a man who refused to bow to injustice. "We shall not remain silent like lambs going to slaughter," he declared, his voice rising above the noise of the marketplace. "Our children will inherit what is rightfully theirs, not the crumbs from the tables of strangers." The people gathered around him, their hearts pounding like talking drums, for they knew his words were not just talk. Herbert had already proven his courage by challenging the British in court, fighting for the rights of traditional rulers, and founding Nigeria's first political party. When the British tried to take the land of the Oba of Lagos without proper compensation, Herbert Macaulay stood in their path like a lion protecting its pride. He took the case all the way to London and won, proving that even the mighty British Empire could be defeated by justice and determination. Far to the east, in the land of the Igbo people, another giant was awakening. His name was Nnamdi Azikiwe, but the people called him Zik, and his very name meant show the way. Zik had traveled across the ocean to America, where he studied in universities and saw how other people governed themselves. He returned to Nigeria with fire in his belly and wisdom in his head. He founded a newspaper called the West African Pilot, which became like a trumpet calling the people to wake up. "Nigeria must be ruled by Nigerians," he wrote in bold letters that seemed to jump off the page. "Our voices must be heard, our land must be ours, and our future must be in our own hands." Zik's newspaper became so popular that people would gather in groups to hear it read aloud. Market women, farmers, students, and workers all nodded their heads as his words spoke the truth that lived in their hearts. In the West, among the Yoruba people, a brilliant lawyer named Obafemi Awolowo was traveling from town to town, village to village, like a modern-day prophet spreading the gospel of freedom. Awolowo was a man who believed that education was the master key that could unlock any door. He had worked his way through school, studied law in London, and returned to Nigeria with a plan to lift up his people through knowledge and unity. "We cannot fight ignorance with ignorance," he would tell the crowds that gathered under the shade of ancient baobab trees. "We cannot fight poverty with more poverty. We must arm ourselves with education, organize ourselves with wisdom, and unite ourselves with love." He reminded the people that their ancestors had built great kingdoms, created beautiful art, and governed with wisdom long before any European set foot on African soil. "We are not inferior people waiting to be civilized," he declared. "We are the children of kings and queens, temporarily displaced from our thrones." In the vast north, under skies so wide they seemed to touch eternity, Sir Amadou Bello, the Sardana of Sokoto, was awakening his own people to the call of freedom. The Sardana was a descendant of the great Usman Dan Fodio, who had founded the Sokoto Caliphate over a century earlier. He carried the dignity of his forefathers like a crown, but he also understood that the world was changing. He held councils with emirs, chiefs, and Islamic scholars under the stars, speaking in languages that had been spoken in those lands for over 1,000 years. "We must preserve our traditions and our faith," he said, his voice carrying the authority of generations. "But we must also embrace progress. Our unity will be our strength, our wisdom will be our weapon, and our faith will be our shield." But the fight for freedom was not only for men. Women rose alongside men, inspired by a warrior queen named Funmilayo Ransom Kuti. She was the mother of the famous musician Fela Kuti, but long before her son became known for his music, she was known for her courage. Funmaleo led women in protests against unfair taxation. She organized market women to resist colonial policies that made life harder for ordinary families. When the British tried to impose unpopular laws, she would march through the streets of Abeokuta with thousands of women behind her, singing songs of resistance that made the colonial administrators tremble. "Freedom belongs to everyone," she would shout, her voice carrying across the crowds like the call of an eagle. "Our hands built this nation, our minds can govern it, and our voices will be heard." These leaders and many others became like lighthouses, showing the way forward in the darkness of colonial rule. They inspired a generation of Nigerians to believe that independence was not just a dream, but a destiny waiting to be claimed. The journey toward independence was like climbing a mountain with many peaks. Each step forward required courage, each victory led to new challenges, and each setback only made the climbers more determined to reach the summit. The British, feeling the pressure from the growing movement for independence, began to respond. But they moved slowly, like a reluctant giant being pushed by determined ants. In 1946, they introduced something called the Richards Constitution, named after the British governor Sir Arthur Richards. This constitution allowed for regional councils where Nigerians could have some say in local matters. But it was like giving a man a single key when he needed to unlock 100 doors. The Nigerian leaders were not satisfied. "We want more than crumbs," Azukaib declared. "We want the whole loaf of bread." In 1951, the British introduced the Macpherson Constitution, named after Governor Sir John Macpherson. This was a bigger step forward. It expanded the Legislative Council and introduced direct elections, allowing Nigerians to choose some of their own representatives. For the first time in decades, Nigerian men and women could cast votes that actually mattered. They lined up at polling stations like soldiers preparing for battle, knowing that each vote was a bullet fired at the walls of colonialism. The elections of 1951 were like a festival of democracy. People dressed in their finest clothes, painted their faces with traditional marks, and sang songs as they marched to vote. When the results came in, Nigerian political parties had won significant victories. But still, it was not enough. The people had tasted freedom and found it sweet. They wanted more. In 1954, the British introduced the Littleton Constitution, which established Nigeria as a federation with regions that had more power to govern themselves. The eastern, western, and northern regions each got their own governments, while a federal government in Lagos handled national matters. This was progress, but it also created new challenges. The different regions began to compete with each other, sometimes forgetting that they were all part of the same Nigerian family. Leaders had to work hard to keep unity alive while fighting for freedom. Throughout these years, the debates were passionate and sometimes heated. Leaders from different regions and tribes argued about the structure of government, the rights of minorities, and how power should be shared. Some wanted a strong central government that could unite the country. Others preferred regional governments that could protect the interests of different groups. Some emphasized rapid modernization, while others wanted to preserve traditional ways of life. But despite their differences, they all shared one common goal: an independent Nigeria ruled by Nigerians. In 1953, a young lawyer named Anthony Inahoro stood up in the Federal Assembly in Lagos and moved a historic motion. His words rang out like a church bell calling the faithful to worship. That this House accepts as a primary political objective the attainment of self-government for Nigeria in 1956. The motion was like lightning striking a tree. It energized the independence movement and earned Inahoro the title Father of Nigerian Nationalism. Though the motion did not pass immediately, it sent a clear message to the British. Nigeria would not wait forever for freedom. The pressure continued to build. Strikes, protests, and demonstrations became common. Students marched through the streets carrying banners that read, "End colonial rule now." Market women refused to pay certain taxes. Even traditional rulers who had initially cooperated with the British began to demand more autonomy. As the 1950s progressed, it became clear to everyone, including the British, that Nigerian independence was not a matter of if, but when. In 1957, the western and eastern regions achieved internal self-government. The northern region followed in 1959. The pieces were falling into place like a puzzle being completed by the hands of destiny. In 1959, Nigeria held its first federal elections. The atmosphere was electric. Political parties campaigned across the length and breadth of the country. The National Council of Nigeria and the Cameroons, led by Nnamdi Azikiwe, competed with the Action Group, led by Obafemi Awolowo, and the Northern People's Congress, led by Sir Ahmadu Bello. The campaigns were like festivals. Political rallies featured traditional music, dancing, and speeches that could move stones to tears. People traveled for miles to hear their favorite leaders speak. Children followed political processions like they were following masquerade festivals. When the votes were counted, no single party had won a clear majority. This led to intense negotiations and coalition building. Finally, the Northern People's Congress and the National Council of Nigeria and the Cameroons formed a coalition government, with Sir Abubakar Tafawa Balewa chosen as prime minister. Tafawa Balewa was a teacher from the north who had earned respect across all regions for his wisdom, humility, and vision of a united Nigeria. He was a man who could speak to Hausa farmers and Yoruba traders with equal ease, who understood both traditional values and modern needs. The stage was now set for the greatest moment in Nigerian history. As 1960 dawned, the excitement across Nigeria was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Independence was no longer a dream whispered in secret meetings. It was a reality approaching like the sunrise. The date was set, October 1st, 1960. Nigeria would become free. The night of September 30th, 1960, was the longest night in Nigerian history. Across the country, people could not sleep. Children asked their parents what tomorrow would bring. Elders who had lived under colonial rule for their entire lives wept with joy, knowing they would see their homeland free before they joined their ancestors. In Lagos, the capital city, preparations had been going on for weeks. The old race course had been transformed into a magnificent venue that would soon be renamed Tafawa Balewa Square in honor of the Prime Minister. As dawn broke on October 1st, 1960, it seemed as if even the sun was eager to witness this historic moment. The sky was painted in brilliant colors of gold and crimson, as if the gods themselves were decorating the heavens for Nigeria's birthday. People began gathering at the racecourse before sunrise. They came from every corner of Nigeria, Hausa horsemen in flowing robes, Yoruba women in colorful gele head wraps, Igbo traders in their finest attire, Fulani herdsmen who had left their cattle to witness history, and representatives of every tribe and tongue that called Nigeria home. The crowd was like a living rainbow, a beautiful display of Nigeria's diversity united in a single purpose. Children sat on their fathers' shoulders, their eyes wide with wonder. Grandmothers who had been born in the 19th century held hands with grandchildren who would grow up in independent Nigeria. Traditional drummers played rhythms that seemed to make the earth itself dance. Praise singers chanted the names of heroes and ancestors. The air was filled with the scent of jollof rice, suya, and all the foods that make Nigerian mouths water. At exactly 12 o'clock midnight, as September 30th became October 1st, a hush fell over the crowd like a blanket of reverence. This was the moment they had all been waiting for. The Union Jack, the red, white, and blue flag that had flown over Nigeria for decades, was slowly lowered for the last time. As it came down, some people wept, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming emotion of seeing the symbol of their subjugation finally removed. Then, as if moved by the breath of the ancestors themselves, the new flag of Nigeria was raised. Green for the forests and agriculture that fed the nation, white for peace and unity, and green again for hope and prosperity. The green-white-green flag caught the morning breeze and unfurled like the wings of an eagle taking flight. At that moment, a roar went up from the crowd that could probably be heard in neighboring countries. Fireworks exploded in the sky like stars being born. Church bells rang, mosque calls to prayer echoed across the city, and traditional drums thundered like the heartbeat of a giant. Princess Alexandra of Kent, representing Queen Elizabeth II, formally handed over the instruments of independence to Prime Minister Tafawa Balewa. The moment her hands released those documents, Nigeria ceased to be a colony and became a free nation. Tafawa Balewa, standing tall and dignified in his flowing white agbada, took the microphone. His voice, usually soft and measured, rang out with power and emotion. Today, we are no longer a colonial territory. Today, We are Nigerians, citizens of our own country. This independence is not a gift given to us by the kindness of others. It has been earned by your courage, your unity, your sacrifices, and your unshakable determination. We have climbed the mountain of colonialism and planted our flag at the summit. The crowd erupted again. People danced, sang, and hugged strangers as if they were long-lost relatives. The celebration continued through the day and deep into the night. Across Nigeria, in every city, town, and village, similar scenes played out. In Kano, the ancient drums of the emirate thundered in celebration. In Ibadan, the Yoruba talking drums sent messages of joy across the hills. In Enugu, coal miners who had built the nation's infrastructure with their bare hands danced in the streets they had helped to build. The eagle of Africa had spread its wings. Nigeria was free. The independence of Nigeria was not the work of one person or even a few people. It was the collective effort of millions of Nigerians who believed that freedom was their birthright. But there were those who stood taller than others, whose courage and vision lit the path for everyone else to follow. These heroes deserve to be remembered forever, their names spoken with reverence by every generation of Nigerians. Herbert Macaulay, the father of Nigerian nationalism, who showed that even the mighty British Empire could be challenged and defeated through law and determination. Nnamdi Azikiwe, Zik of Africa, whose newspapers awakened the consciousness of a generation and whose vision of African unity inspired the entire continent. Obafemi Awolowo, the sage of Nigerian politics, whose emphasis on education and federal structure helped shape modern Nigeria. Sir Ahmadu Bello, the Sardana of Sokoto, who preserved northern Nigeria's heritage while embracing progress and modernization. Sir Abubakar Tafawa Balewa, the gentle teacher who became a statesman and led Nigeria into independence with wisdom and humility. Anthony Inahoro, whose bold motion for self-government in 1953 accelerated the march to independence. Funmilayo Ransome Kuti, the lioness who proved that the fight for freedom belonged to women as much as men. And countless others whose names may not be written in history books, but whose contributions were just as important. The market women who resisted unfair taxation, the students who organized protests, the workers who went on strike, the traditional rulers who gradually withdrew their cooperation from colonial authorities, and ordinary citizens who simply refused to accept that their homeland should be ruled by foreigners. Each sacrifice, each protest, each speech, each vote, each act of defiance was like a brick in the foundation of Nigerian freedom. Together, they built a nation. Since independence, Nigeria has faced both triumphs and challenges, like any nation walking the difficult path of self-governance. There have been military coups and returns to democracy, civil war and reconciliation, economic booms and recessions, corruption and reform. Leaders like Yakubu Gowon helped hold the nation together during its darkest hour. Olusegun Obasanjo worked to restore democratic governance. Goodluck Jonathan showed that power could be transferred peacefully, and many others have contributed to Nigeria's journey in their own ways. Today, Nigeria stands as the most populous country in Africa, with over 200 million people representing more than 250 ethnic groups. It is home to Nollywood, the world's second-largest film industry. Its music, from Fela's Afrobeat to today's Afrobeat stars, influences the entire world. Its literature, from Chinua Achebe to Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, tells African stories that resonate globally. Nigerian entrepreneurs are building technology companies that serve the entire continent. Nigerian doctors, engineers, and scholars are making contributions in every field of human knowledge. Nigerian athletes are winning medals at the Olympics and World Cups. The children and grandchildren of those who fought for independence are now presidents of banks, CEOs of multinational companies, professors in world-renowned universities, and leaders in every profession imaginable. But Nigeria's greatest achievement is not its oil wealth or its international recognition. Its greatest achievement is that it has remained one nation, united in its diversity, despite all the forces that have tried to tear it apart. The same spirit that brought independence, the refusal to accept injustice, the determination to overcome obstacles, the belief that Nigerians can achieve anything they set their minds to, that same spirit is alive today in every Nigerian who chooses to build rather than destroy, to unite rather than divide, to hope rather than despair. The story of Nigerian independence is not just a tale of the past. It is a call to action for the present and a promise for the future. Every Nigerian alive today is living in the Nigeria that those heroes fought to create. But more than that, every Nigerian alive today has the power to shape the Nigeria that future generations will inherit. The same blood that flowed through the veins of Nnamdi Azikiwe flows through the veins of young Nigerians studying in universities today. The same courage that lived in the heart of Funmilayo Ransom Kuti lives in the hearts of women building businesses and leading communities across Nigeria. The same vision that guided Obafemi Awolowo can guide young leaders who are working to solve Nigeria's challenges. The independence heroes did not fight so that their descendants could be satisfied with mediocrity. They fought so that every Nigerian could have the opportunity to achieve greatness. Today, Nigeria needs new heroes. It needs young people who will refuse to accept corruption as normal. It needs entrepreneurs who will create jobs for millions of unemployed youth. It needs politicians who will put the nation's interest above personal gain. It needs citizens who will vote based on competence rather than ethnicity or religion. Nigeria needs people who will look at the problems facing the country, insecurity, poverty, corruption, lack of infrastructure, and say, these challenges will not defeat us. We are the children of people who defeated the British Empire. We can defeat anything. The technology exists today for Nigeria to leapfrog decades of development. The natural resources exist for every Nigerian to live in prosperity. The human talent exists for Nigeria to lead the world in any field it chooses to prioritize. What Nigeria needs most is for its citizens to choose to be great. Greatness is not about being born into privilege. Many of the independence heroes came from humble backgrounds. Herbert Macaulay's grandfather was enslaved, but became a bishop. Tafawa Balewa was a teacher's son who became prime minister. Nnamdi Azikiwe worked multiple jobs to pay for his education in America. Greatness is about making a decision that your life will count for something positive. It's about choosing to be part of the solution rather than part of the problem. It's about believing that you can make a difference and then working every day to prove that belief right. As we celebrate Nigeria's independence, we celebrate more than just a historical event. We celebrate the proof that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they unite around a common purpose. We celebrate the proof that no force on earth can permanently suppress people who refuse to give up on their dreams. We celebrate the proof that Africa can govern itself, develop itself, and take its rightful place among the great nations of the world. But most importantly, we celebrate the ongoing story of Nigeria, which is still being written by every Nigerian who chooses to make their country better. The eagle that took flight on October 1st, 1960, is still soaring. Sometimes it faces strong winds that try to push it backward. Sometimes it encounters storms that test its strength. But it keeps flying, because that is what eagles do. And every young Nigerian who chooses excellence over mediocrity, unity over division, hope over despair, adds strength to that eagle's wings. Your story is part of Nigeria's story. Your dreams are part of Nigeria's destiny. Your success is part of Nigeria's future. The independence heroes did their part. They gave you a free nation. Now it's your turn. What will you do with the freedom they died to give you? What legend will you write with your life? What chapter will you add to the great story of Nigeria? The pen is in your hand. The page is blank. The world is waiting to read what you will write. Thank you for watching When Africa Speaks. If this story of courage, determination, and unity has stirred something in your heart, hit that subscribe button and join our community of dreamers and achievers. Share this story with someone who needs to remember that they come from a people who achieve impossible things. Let it remind you that legends are not born. They are made by ordinary people who refuse to accept ordinary results. The next legend could be you. The next hero could be you. The next great story could be yours. Because when you speak with courage, wisdom, and love, the world stops to listen. Until next time, keep flying high, keep dreaming big, and never forget, you are the child of kings and queens, warriors and builders, dreamers and achievers. Your time is now. Your legend begins today. Subscribe to When Africa Speaks, where legends never die. They simply inspire new legends to rise.